Today we celebrate the feast of Pope St. John Paul II, who was near and dear to many of us. He is credited with the fall of communism, and many legends have grown up around him that he did this and he did that, and he single-handedly overthrew communism. And when the novelists are researching his real life and talking to people that actually, he didn't do all of the things that some of the people said he did, but the things that he was most proud of in this life were probably not enormous things like overthrowing communism, having them tear down the wall in Berlin. The things I think that he was probably most proud of were the little things that he did. The way he taught. He would have a weekly audience and he would give lectures, a whole series of lectures on what love is supposed to be like between a man and a woman. And they weave that together into a book called The Theology of the Body, which was, in its simplicity, radical. It was one of those books that taught us what real love is supposed to be about between a man and a woman. It contradicts some of the stuff that's in the first reading, saying that we don't do the things that we want to do, but we do the things that we don't want to do, but our body is always at war between the flesh and the spirit. That St. Paul even talked about the thorn in the flesh that he had, the thing that plagued him his whole life long, and he prayed to God 3 times in earnest that thorn in the flesh would leave him. But God said, no, because in my power is, in your weakness, my power is made perfect. That his grace would help us overcome those bodily desires of ours. If you think about it, it's so much easier to sin than it is to be holy. If you're driving and someone cuts you off and you just react and blare the horn or something like that, it feels so good to curse them out when they're gone. You know, it does, and it feels so good when you do something that's just a little bit naughty. But that's not God. It's not of God. It takes a little bit of work not to join in when people are talking about someone and you want to join in and say, oh yeah, well, you know what they did to me one time? It's so easy to just fall into those little patterns that just seem to come naturally, but they're not God's nature. It's the devil's nature. And it's those little things that we do that make all the difference in the world. John Paul had this just simple holiness about him, kind of the holiness that the Blessed Mother had. And I'm sure that with a glance she could melt the most hardened heart with those kind eyes of hers. And Pope John Paul was one of those people that just loved little children and handicapped children and people in general. He had a heart kind of like Saint Teresa of Calcutta. And those little things that we do are the things that make up saintliness. It's not necessarily the huge things like bringing down communism. I think about the holiness that he called us to in his Theology of the Body, that tender love between a man and a woman. And I have to think back on my own mom and my dad. My mom used to make sandwiches for my dad. She would make a lunch for him. And one time my sister told me that she accidentally got Dad's lunch in the brown paper bag instead of her lunch, which was just a sandwich and maybe an apple. Dad's sandwich was carefully wrapped. It was just jumbo. But it was wrapped neatly in wax paper, and then he had dill pickles that were sliced meticulously and wrapped separately so they wouldn't get the bread soggy. And there was a little Twinkie or something in there along with it. And you think about all the love that went into those tiny little things. Those are the things that love is really made of. The things that make for happily ever after. And I'll never forget one time when I was at Good Samaritan, there was an old man. He was was probably close to 90, and his wife, and they would come to Mass every Saturday night. And he would be all dressed up, and she would be next to him, and she'd be walking with her walker, and he would be right beside her with his hand on her hand on the walker and the other arm carrying her purse. And I said to him one time, I said, I don't know, Guy, that purse doesn't go with your shoes. But he looked at me real proudly, and without a blink, he said, it doesn't go with my shoes, but it goes with her, and I go with her. That's the kind of love that makes for happily ever after, the kind of love that John Paul wrote about. And it's those little sacrifices we make, getting up early to make someone's lunch, the doing the dishes when it's not your turn, the little hugs when you know that someone comes home from work and they've had a bad day. It's those little things that make for saintliness. And none of those things are beyond our reach. It says in Scripture that we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And those witnesses are not just the saints whose names are in the books. It's the saints that we live with day in and day out. And hopefully one day we'll be counted among their number.